Welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, grief and soul purpose coach, and fellow griever, Tara Accardo. Welcome back to Life with Grief. Today, we're chatting with a really special guest, Kelsey Mora, who is a child life specialist and therapist, and we are getting all into the intricacies of navigating grief with children and children's grief specifically. Honestly, you guys, this is a conversation I've been wanting to have on here for so long. It has come up in other guest episodes before, perhaps from other parents who have had to explain grief and loss to their kids, but I was looking for the perfect specialist to be able to speak to this topic today. And you guys, we have found her. So this conversation covers Kelsey's personal journey and professional journey, starting from her teenage years when she lost a dear friend to leukemia to her current role in private practice. We explore the balance between honesty and hope when discussing serious health issues and death with children, and the importance of clear and age-appropriate communication, which I know can be so hard to gauge, especially for us adults. And Kelsey gives so much valuable insights here and some really effective strategies and things to keep in mind for supporting grieving children and just engaging in those difficult conversations with them about grief, loss, and illness. Kelsey, welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I am so thrilled to have you here today, and I'm really, really excited to get into this particular topic with you because it has come up here and there on the podcast before with other guests that, have children that they've had to navigate grief with and talk to them about grief. But I was so excited to talk to you because this is literally what you do. You are the expert. So just a big thank you to you for being here today.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Thanks so much for having me. I always love when people want to lean into difficult conversations with kids. So I appreciate you prioritizing it.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, our kid, I don't know, you can speak to this, but having a 1-year-old myself who, doesn't totally know what's going on yet, but I could just imagine if she was like a little bit older and we're going through something difficult, like having to explain that or, just making sure that they get the right care and support that they need. And I think a lot of people are, unclear, myself even, this is, I'm going to learn a lot today too, is, just not sure how to do that or the best way to do that without traumatizing them further. And I think it's a lot of fear for a lot of parents out there. So, so very, very important topic. But I love to kick off these episodes with you just telling everyone a little bit about yourself. So, any fun facts, things you like to do in your spare time, things along those lines.
Sure. Yeah. Do you want me to give a professional background or just my personal background?
You can give the personal stuff, and then we're gonna get into all the griefy
Okay.
professional
Okay.
stuff after that. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I live in the northern suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. I relocated here for my job, but I was willing to relocate anywhere. I
Uh-huh.
just happened to end up here, and I was dating my now husband at the time, and so it worked out. And we this year will be our 10-year wedding anniversary, so it's a
Congrats.
big year for us. And
Yeah.
we have two little kids. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, and I love
Busy.
to dance. That's like probably one of my favorite things to do.
So fun. What
Yeah.
kind? I have to ask, what kind in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up dancing. So I started when I was
Awesome.
3. I started competing when I was 7, and I danced through college. So now I just do like
Oh,
a cardio dance class once a week. But I did dance more competitively throughout my life, like all kinds, hip hop,
so cool.
jazz, lyrical, tap. Yeah, and then I love being outside. I love adventures, especially just seeing life through my kids' eyes. Like that's
Mhm.
so joyful now. And we're bilingual, so we speak Spanish at home.
Great.
And we are Jewish as well, so we kind of got this like Jewish Spanish fusion happening at our house, which is really unique and
I
fun to
love
see the
that.
kids grow up with that culture.
That's amazing. I can empathize with that in my own way. Just as far as we want to teach our daughter Italian, because my husband has Italian citizenship and is Italian by descent and everything. And we're both learning. We have been for a while, but yeah. So I might have to pick your brain after this about how to teach your kids 2 languages at once because we're just getting into it. And she knows a few words. It's really fun to watch, but yeah, I literally am like always on the verge of Googling like how to teach your child 2 languages at once so they don't get confused. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's funny because since I came out of the hospital and I had a lot of like speech therapy friends, and so I
Mhm.
asked one of my coworkers, and they sent me a bunch of handouts on raising bilingual children. And there's actually a lot of different approaches. It
I'm
depends on
sure.
like who speaks what language in the home. So
Right.
we're kind of learning as we go. But my son, who's 4.5, he's like completely bilingual and just code switches all day. So
That is so
it's
cool.
working out.
I love that. Love that
Yeah,
for him. That's gonna come in handy one day for sure.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So talk to me about definitely how you got into the work that you do, but I was curious too, and other people listening here might be curious, have you journeyed through some grief and loss of your own to kind of get into this profession? Because I think for a lot of people, they're like, how do you come to work in children's grief? Did that come from personal experience? So kind of just walk us through, yeah, the professional part of your life as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so when I was 16, I was like newly 16, new driver's license. My friend died from leukemia, actually, and I was super involved in his life. He was part of my group of friends
Mhm.
and just was getting sicker and sicker. And I was actually really scared to visit him in the hospital.
Yeah.
And so I had a friend tell me, like, I think you should go. You don't want to remember him like this.
Mhm.
And then I went, and he died while I was there, actually, which I wasn't expecting.
That's like
Obviously,
your
it was pretty
biggest
sudden.
fear.
Yeah,
In a
yeah,
way.
and I, have a kid knocking on my door.
That's
The
okay.
joys of balancing life and work. And so then I like drove home, and I just remember being alone in a hallway and like not having a ton of support. And so I started volunteering where he was treated, and I learned about child life. So that's one of my credentials, and I became a child life specialist. Like just went to school, studied exactly what I needed to, took all the
Wow.
classes for it. Was volunteering where he was treated. I ended up doing a practicum where he was treated.
Oh my
So that
gosh.
was really what led me to the profession. And I've definitely had other grief experiences since then, but certainly what helped me find the career is really to make sure that other kids who are experiencing what I experienced don't
Mhm.
have to do it alone and
Yeah,
have more support and resources. So
that's amazing. Can you walk us through, like I was gonna say, like, what does your day-to-day look like? But, like, seriously, if somebody were, coming to you for help like this, is it typically a parent that reaches out? Like, how or I guess if you're working at a particular place, are they kind of, like, assigned to you? Just kind of walk us through, like, how do you come to work with, children in this
yeah,
space? Yeah.
yeah, so it definitely depends on the setting. So when
Mhm.
I worked in the pediatric ICU, I would have a list of patients every day based on the unit I was working. Sometimes if I covered a weekend, you have all the units and you have to prioritize and
Mm,
assess kind of who needs what, when, and how. Which, if there is a dying patient,
yeah,
that ends up being a lot of where we're spending our time.
of
And it
course.
may mean that we don't get to other patients, but that's kind of where we're needed most. So I start my day and I see my patient census or list, and I basically just go through the list and prioritize based on what's going on. So
Mhm.
trying to see new patients first, kids who are having medical procedures, any sort of critical illness or death and dying situation. Now that I'm in private practice, so I'm a therapist and a child life specialist. So people find me and they
Mhm.
request different types of services depending on what's going on. So sometimes that's individual therapy with a child or teen. Sometimes it's working with the whole family. Sometimes it's guiding the parent on how to talk to their kids. So I do a lot of parent sessions where we're talking about how to explain something to your children or how to parent grieving children, or
Mhm.
things like that. So it really depends on the setting.
Yeah. What's, like, typically the youngest child that you're working with to, like, oldest? Like, what's kind of the age range?
I work with very little children, like
Mhm.
toddlers.
Wow.
I've worked with under 2 year olds, but usually I say
Mhm.
around 2 to 22 is my age range.
Mhm.
So in toddler through late adolescence and young adulthood.
Okay, got it. I mean, obviously, like you said, you work
But
with
in the
adults as well, but
hospital, yeah,
yeah, so
in the
yeah.
hospital, I mean, it was infants as well. So I
Oh my
might be
gosh.
meeting with parents of a 6-month-old who have older kids at home, or even just helping with parenting a medically complex child or different things like that. We do a lot of keepsakes and memory making in the hospital. So
Mm.
if a child is dying or a parent or caregiver is dying, we're often making like hand molds and ink prints and locks of hair and doing those things. So it really could be any age. I've also done perinatal and pregnancy and
Wow.
infant losses as well when I worked in the hospital.
Okay, so it really spans, like, the work that you do really, I mean, it's the situations are really kind of, I'm not gonna say endless, but like there's just so many, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, it really
Yeah.
just depends on the setting, and I was in a children's hospital within an adult hospital, so we kind of
Okay, yeah.
covered everywhere, but obviously a standalone children's hospital is gonna look a little different, an outpatient clinic, an emergency room. I mean, when it comes to death, emergency room deaths can be
Yeah.
obviously very critical,
Mhm.
traumatic, sudden, so that looks a little bit different depending on, the cause of death.
Yeah. This is getting a little bit on the deeper side, but like, so for those instances that are a little more, let's say, dire, what does what does the support look like for instances like that versus ones that are maybe there's an illness or something, or it's not as, dare I say, time sensitive? Like, can you just kind of give us a little glimpse into like what that type of work might look like?
Yeah, so I'll start with like an emergency room
Mhm.
death. If a child is perhaps has already died or is actively dying, often we are responding to the situation and collaborating with a team. So that's, of course, the medical team as well as any ancillary staff. So that could be a chaplain, a social worker. And so we're kind of dividing and conquering. So often a child life specialist role would be to assess if there's any siblings or other children present. So sometimes we're going into, say, a waiting room or a private room and actually updating other kids with, of course,
Okay.
involving parents and their desires in terms of how involved or who's doing what. It may just be sitting with them and providing distraction and comfort until there is an update.
Mhm.
Sometimes we're right there with that dying child. If they are, alert and oriented, we might be providing support to them while really scary things are happening around them.
Mhm.
Sometimes if it's a sudden death of like a parent, we would also be, supporting the children of an adult. So that's like kind of crisis management. We're
Mhm.
responding to the situation, figuring out what's needed. As a pediatric ICU child life specialist, I was in rooms where a child was having a cardiac arrest or sudden, change in their condition at the bedside, and so supporting the parents and the siblings, depending on who's there and who needs what. Sometimes it's just getting a glass of water, or a box of
Yeah.
tissues, or a chair for someone to sit down. So we really respond to whatever's needed in that moment, and it's kind of a dance between all the different providers of who's needing what.
Mhm.
Child life specialists are also really good at explaining things in a way that people can understand. So
Yeah.
sometimes I'm breaking things down for a parent who is in total, their nervous system is totally dysregulated. They're in heightened fight or flight, and I'm just telling them what's happening at the
Mhm.
bedside using, what I would normally call age appropriate or
Yeah.
developmentally appropriate words. But for that parent, they're really needing it broken down in a way
Yeah.
that they can understand. So that's kind of that emergent crisis. I'm happy to answer more questions before I kind of move on to more of like an illness situation.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, gosh, I was getting chills as you were talking about all of this because my husband and I, some people on this podcast, or even you may or may not know, but like for, our daughter was in the NICU she was in the NICU for 18 days, but like the day she was born, I had emergency C-section and all of that. It was life or death, frankly, and I we had a great team around us, and it's interesting because I think, in all honesty, like, of course, I have my trauma around it, but it's interesting because I think my husband actually even has more trauma. Also, I went through the deaths of my parents. I had been in more hospital settings than him, so I certainly wasn't comfortable, but I was getting, like, stitched up as they were in the NICU, or IC
Yeah.
yeah, PICU, I guess, um, whatever that's technically called, um, while, they were just like, "Okay," like, he told me this after, but they were like, Your daughter is dying. We need you to sign these papers for blood transfusions and, like, all of these things." And we've talked about this many times, but I can only begin to imagine, I can imagine being in my spot, just the one giving birth to her, but, like, him on the other end of that feeling so hopeless and just helpless, and it's like, "Okay, I guess this is all I can do right now." And, like, so as you were talking about that, heightened shock, fight or flight or whatever, like, it brings me back, but it just makes me so sad because, thinking about what people have to go through, whether it's the parent dying or the child or whatever, just again, the trauma that can come from that is so long lasting, and
Yeah.
severe, but
Yeah. Absolutely.
yeah, and just having the right, anyway, so I just want to, like, highlight the work that you do because truly having the right support in those moments can, like, This sounds like intense, but like kind of make or break someone's experience. I've known people that have had very even more so traumatizing experience than they would have had because the people around were not responding well, or they were, you know what I mean? Like they weren't getting what they needed from, support like you. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's intense.
I'm glad your daughter is okay
Yeah, she's
and
good.
one
Thank
now it
you.
sounds like, but
Yeah.
I mean it's such a the NICU is like
Oh,
the
brutal.
best place to be when you need it, but the scariest place to be
Yes.
for sure. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so my motto that I kind of created when I worked at the hospital, we did a narrative medicine exercise for like
Mhm.
self-care and support. And we had to create a 6-word kind of memoir that represented our work. And so mine was turning difficult moments into better memories. And that's become like
Mhm.
my kind of, for lack of a better word, like motto or
Yeah.
slogan or whatever. And it's like what helps me because those moments are so difficult. And I feel like what I can play such a role in helping create better memories,
Mhm.
even when there's loss.
Yeah.
So for your husband, it's like remembering maybe an interaction or something someone
Yeah.
said or did, or to lessen those stressful moments. And sometimes it's just asking a parent, like, tell me about your daughter, or
Yeah.
what's her name, right? Just asking those questions and really humanizing the experience because those medical environments are so overwhelming and
Yeah.
unfamiliar for a lot of people.
Definitely, and especially, like, as you were kind of mentioning, like, the medical jargon, so to speak, like, they were I think they kinda tried to dumb things down, but it was also very, like, there's a lot of doctors around, and they did not I'll be very honest, they didn't have the best, like, bedside manner. They were very, like it was always very, like, worst case scenario, and I actually this is a great question for you. How do you kind of I think you're really well trained in this, it sounds like, but I know there's other medical professionals who I'm just gonna say are not. How do you like maintain a good balance between, not sugarcoating things, but also not being like so brutally honest? Because like literally those things that were said to my husband, like truly added to the trauma. And I'm like, at the same time, I understand they needed to be very honest about what was happening, but like, my God, he kind of carries that with him a little bit. Like he's fine, but it's
Yeah,
not something you forget. So yeah, like how do you balance that?
yeah. It's funny you ask. When I worked in the hospital, I was part of the simulation team, and we actually
Mm.
would do like practice
Oh my gosh.
scenarios where we trained residents and doctors and fellows like how to deliver difficult news to a parent. And so I was part of that process, and we would basically act and use
Wow.
mannequins and have a simulated loss and have them give them the space to practice delivering that news to a parent. And it was such a cool thing to be part of to
Yeah.
help people learn and train and practice and make mistakes and
Mhm.
in a safe space, because it's not something that comes naturally to many people,
Yeah.
and it does take practice, but you don't want practice to be with a real
Right.
family. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not the medical expert, so I'm always listening to the team and collaborating with the team, and then helping deliver that information in a way that is honest, but
Mhm.
also continues to foster hope. Um and so finding that balance, sometimes it's like this is really serious, right?
Yeah.
But also meeting a parent or a person where they're at and asking them like, what are you making of this, or how are you feeling, or
Mm.
what are your biggest concerns, what are your greatest wishes, so that I can understand what are they hoping for. And
Mhm.
once I know where they're at, it makes it a little bit easier to then meet them where they're at and follow their lead. And if I need to provide more information, then I'll walk with them step by step. And sometimes it's really small movements, like
Mhm.
when you were asking about, when there's someone who's ill. I do a lot of parent illness work, so helping kids with anticipatory grief
Yeah.
and navigating different stages of a parent or loved one's illness. And so a lot of times it's helping parents figure out when to use more honest terms, like that means he's going to die, or and
Right.
you kind of have to wait till there is a really
Ugh.
clear change, because of course there's still hope, and even at the end there's hope. Like I've met with such amazing teenagers who like hope changes for them and they're able to speak to that. Like in the beginning I hoped they'd get better, and then I'd hoped for good days, and then I hoped for their memory to stay alive. And so just holding space for hope and reality at the same time. It's
Yeah.
complicated. I don't know. It's different for everyone, right? It's really
No
meeting them
kidding.
where they're at.
Yeah. You could probably only do your best in those situations too. I mean, there's probably so much going on and, depending on the situation and yeah, I mean, I would imagine it's one of those things that you can't please everyone, right? But like you can at least like do your best in those moments. And you kind of already answered this. I know I sort of interrupted you as far as like, what do you do in those like kind of heightened situations? Was there anything more that you wanted to like expound on in terms of like as I kind of mentioned, like the less time sensitive situations, if you will, like the types of conversations you might, um, or the strategy, I guess, for lack of a better term, that you would use in situations like that, or is it more or less what you kind of just described?
Yeah, more or less. I think the one thing I would add, like for parents who are listening, is it's a lot of bite-sized conversations. And
Yeah.
so the earlier that we can start open communication with kids, the better those subsequent conversations can be. Because I
Mhm.
have worked with families who have maybe waited, and then there's like a lot to talk about all at once, and that can
Yeah.
be really overwhelming. So having those small conversations along the way, at the time of a diagnosis, when there's a change, good, bad, or otherwise, can make it a little bit easier for kids because there's a shared language already and they kind of expect those changes along the way. So I do a lot of that type of work, both in private practice, but I also did in the hospital. Sometimes we had really chronically ill, medically complex kiddos that we really got to know, and then maybe their condition changed, and then we were nearing end of life, and we really knew them well. So the relationships and the you know, it, things we did looked a little bit different, but
Right.
um, and then there's the time to make like keepsakes and things like that if that's
Mhm.
meaningful for the family. So
I love that. This is like definitely like the main question I wanted to ask you today. What is important for adults to keep in mind about children's grief and like what does it look like to navigate that and what to say, what not to say?
yeah, I always say to give an age appropriate version of the truth. And
Mhm.
so that's like something I talk about a lot. It's like giving an honest explanation that is age appropriate. And so for little kids, that's being really crystal clear. Like it's
Mm,
actually saying death or dying, because a lot
okay.
of euphemisms like going to heaven or passed away or heaven forbid sleep are like
Yeah.
not good for
Oh my
little kids
God.
because it's confusing. It's more confusing. It doesn't make sense. It's associated with things that are supposed to be, pleasant or positive. So
Yeah.
using really clear language like they're dying, they died, their body stopped working, they won't
Mhm.
come back. And it feels really harsh, but
Yeah.
it's just how their brain processes the information. So that's something for younger kids for sure.
Mhm.
Um, and there are like very clear developmental responses to death and dying and grief and loss. So there's certain considerations, like older kids have a little bit more abstract thinking.
Mhm.
I think I did a post on my Instagram about like the questions that kids are asking at different ages. It's like, are
Mhm.
you going to die? Am I going to
Oh my
die? Like,
gosh,
when are you
yeah.
coming back? So depending on the age of the child, their comprehension of what death means is going to look really different based on their development.
Right. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up, especially with like the younger kids, just being frankly like brutally honest with it because I think a lot of parents or adults they want to tiptoe. They're so small and innocent, and you don't want to like break their little hearts and things like that. But I almost wonder too, and maybe even you can speak to this, like if they even really understand the concept of like death, like what that word really means, especially depending on how young they truly are. So like it's almost like by using that word, I don't know, still might not totally understand it anyway, so, like, it's maybe just confusing as is, but then, like, God forbid, like you said, like, using sleep or anything else, like, that's only gonna confuse it even more. Is that kinda fair to
Yeah.
say? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that kids like know what it means.
Yeah,
Although,
right.
I think that we are all really scared of death and dying. And the
Mhm.
reality is like we are facing death and dying every day.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
if it's a rainy day and you see a bunch of dead worms on the sidewalk, like that is death. If the change of seasons and the leaves are falling to the
Yeah,
ground and the trees are bare, like that's death. That's a circle of life. And
great
so
point.
even like there are actually really natural times to talk about death and dying with kids. And I've talked to parents who are like, Oh, yeah, like, I did tell them that the worm was sleeping, or something silly, and it's like, "Why
Yeah.
did I do that?" Because I don't wanna talk about death and dying, but, like,
Yeah.
kids need to know, like, that's a dead worm, like, worms die, things die, and so even before a kid is faced with a really tragic situation, like, we can and should, as a society, be talking about death and dying just more naturally
Mhm.
because it is natural, and then when they're, heaven forbid, faced with a real death, personal situation, um, it's not all new and shocking,
Right.
but you're right, they don't fully understand or comprehend, but that's not a reason to wait because
Right.
we can't, like, protect them from the person they love not coming back, and so we have to name it, and it does require a lot of repetition, like, for younger kids, I've worked with kids who see their parents' car in the garage, and they're like, "He's back." He's not back. Remember, he died. His
Oh,
body stopped working. He won't be coming back. And it's because it's their brain is already thinking and feeling these things. And so it can actually provide relief for a parent to be that guide to say, like, this is what's actually happening. Even if it
mhm.
feels really harsh, it's like, uh, you can trust that I'm going to explain it to you and I'm going to support you through it.
Yeah.
I always say we can't control the situation, but we can control how supported kids feel, and like that's our job as adults.
Yeah. Supported and loved. Yeah. What and you've already kind of given a little bit of this, but is there any other like tips or recommendations that you would provide in terms of, guiding parents of grieving children or, and even if it's, I guess we could even talk like more than just the death of a loved one here, just, um, well, I guess we're talking mostly death of a loved one. I was gonna say even like, if they're grieving, like maybe there's a move and they're kind of like having a tough time with that. Although is a lot of the work you do mostly with like those losing loved ones, or is there do you work with children or even adults with just like other big phases of life where there might be some grief, i.e. like a big move or, some major life change?
Yeah, I mean, I support families that are grieving a lot of different types of non-death losses, specifically throughout illness, like change
Right.
in a loved one's abilities or hospitalization or separation of family members as a result of illness. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of times when families are grieving, even like an acquired disability or mobility, or like I work with kids who have a parent with, let's say, brain cancer, and their parent is changing a lot as a result of the brain cancer, but hasn't died. And so
Yeah.
there's ambiguous loss, there's non-death losses for sure. And the strategies are really the same. It's like having those honest conversations, giving normalizing feelings. One thing I think is so important for parents to know is that it is okay for them to cry in front of their kid. Like that
Mhm.
shows their kid real emotion, like saying, I'm
Yeah.
really sad, gives your kid permission to be like, yeah, me too. And that's an okay thing. Or I feel really silly and happy today, and that's also okay, even though dad died. So helping kids know that like all feelings are okay, and really modeling and practicing coping with them is such a life skill
Yeah.
to develop regardless of the reason. So coping is a huge part of this too.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of coping, like, are there any like exercises or, arts and crafts? I mean, things like that, if there's a parent or someone or just a loved one here listening that, let's say a child has experienced some trauma, death of a loved one, whatever that looks like, that they could maybe continue doing at home to kind of like keep the memory alive or just, just make sure that they're like just doing okay, like mentally, physically, like all the things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, depending on the age of the child, there's a lot of great children's books that can be a
Mhm.
great way to feel connected and to process grief. In terms of hands-on activities, I always really like helping kids decorate like a picture frame. It's a really simple activity. You can get a wooden frame, and they could decorate it and put a picture of themselves with their loved one or their loved one in it. That could be appropriate for pet loss or any
Yeah.
other type of loss. Memory boxes, decorating a memory box, really helping kids with those continued bonds and that connection. Like death is not the end of a relationship, it's the end of a life. And so, how can that
Yeah.
child still feel connected to their loved one? Sometimes it's planting a tree, decorating rocks, having a little rock garden, writing letters. There's a lot of ways for kids to feel connected to their loved one, and it's just kind of figuring out what works best for them. But those are some of
Yeah.
the or bracelet making can be a
Mhm.
good one, like putting their loved one's
Your, like,
name on a
name or
bracelet using
something,
beads.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that. Those are great like, high level suggestions, right? Like, totally, like you said, it's so dependent on the family and what resonates with each person, but one other quick follow-up question that I had that kinda, like, came to mind as we were talking is And maybe you can answer this first, like, do people, especially maybe now that you're in, like, private practice, do families or parents or whoever come to you because they notice, like, a change in their child and they're a little bit worried, or is it kind of preventative? Like, I guess I'm just wondering, like, let's say, I'm a parent, I have a child that goes through something traumatic, or maybe there's a death in the family, and, I'm coping the best I can, but, like, I notice, like, my child maybe isn't doing so well. Are there, like, signs and things that we might wanna look out for in our kids that could, allude to the fact that, like, oh, maybe they're struggling with their grief, or, like, just things that parents can be kind of, hyper vigilant about, in terms of, making sure the child is doing okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I always say that, like, illness and grief are not a problem to be fixed. Like,
Yeah.
there's no diagnosis, there's no,
Well, thanks, please.
often it's a situation to support, and
Yeah.
so I often have families finding me and coming to me more, preventatively, and it's not those are the times when I'm not I love that, I'm a dual certified child life specialist and therapist. So I have the psychotherapy lens, but often I'm providing just a safe, supportive space for grief processing or
Mhm.
coping or making sense of a situation, helping parents communicate and connect with their child. So it's not always super clinical in
Mhm.
nature, meaning, like treatment focused. It's
Right.
because we're not treating
Yeah,
anything. Like we are
exactly.
supporting something. And so that's a distinguisher where like it might be preventative where they're saying, hey, like we face this tragic situation, we need help with our kids, and like they would seek me out because my approach is going to maybe look different than if they went to a community mental health center and had like a full evaluation and a diagnosis. Nothing wrong with that, it just might not be what's needed right away.
Mhm.
Sometimes I do meet with parents or kids or families when they're starting to worry about a child's coping or anxiety. So that might be like their behaviors or actions are out of proportion with
Mhm.
the situation, meaning, it's hard because grief looks like a lot of things.
Right,
Like kids who
yeah,
are
it's like,
grieving,
how do
I'm
you
sure you can
know?
relate with your own grief. Like you're
Yeah.
often distracted, you're often have difficulty sleeping, you're
Not doing
you're,
well in
all those
school
things,
if
but
you're in school, like
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
But it might be changes in sleep, eating, going to school, separation anxiety,
Mhm.
becoming more withdrawn or reserved. Certainly if there's a safety concern, that is,
Yeah.
the utmost emergent priority. But often it's some of these other things, stomach aches or kind of psychosomatic things like kids complaining about their stomach hurting or headaches or staying closer to home. So just those marked changes that um, seem prolonged or out of
Mhm.
proportion because typical grief moves in and out, right? It's usually
Right.
not static. Like you might have good days and bad days or good
Yeah.
moments and hard moments. So I talk to kids a lot about grief waves and riding those waves, but I think it becomes sometimes a concern when there's either like no waves or all waves, so
Right.
maybe it's like that to me is concerning. But again, everyone grieves different too. So
Yeah, yeah, great point. Couple other last questions for you. This one also kind of came up as you were speaking, but it also really hit me too, like with your friend who died and going through all of that, and you were on the younger side when that happened, and I know so many people now. I have family members that are also like this that don't they're like scared of hospitals now and don't want to go back there, or just it that again the trauma really like there's a ripple effect, and how I mean, they literally will. I know people who, like, just don't go to the doctor anymore and even get checkups because they are, like, worried that, that's gonna happen to them, or, I've had multiple people be like, "Well, if you go to the doctor, they're always gonna find something wrong with you." It's like, "Okay." So, like, is there anything that you would say to, I guess, really more adults here, or, whatever lens you kind of wanna put this through, of just, like, any just kind of final coping tools to warm ourselves up to that again, or just, cope with some of the trauma that comes with this. And then, especially if you're a parent, watching your child go through this too. And like, you're a parent as well. Like the last thing you ever want is to see your child go through anything difficult, but we can't shield them from life. So yeah, just any kind of last coping tools, things like that. You've already provided a lot today, but it's just for
yeah,
anyone who's feeling kind of stuck in that a little bit.
yeah. Actually, one of the first things I do with every new child that I meet is teach them about their nervous system. Like, I teach them
Yeah,
a lot
that's
about
great.
fight or flight or freeze. So I'll
Mhm.
often talk about a bear or a snake, and like, I even have this snake fidget that I'm like, what if you saw the snake? Like, how would you react? And then we're like, oh, that was actually running away. That was fighting. I had a kid the other day tell me they'd hit it with a marker, like, because we were in my
Good for
office,
him,
and I'm
because
like,
I'd be out
yeah,
there.
that's fight. Yeah. So, and then it helps them understand. I'm like, but the problem is sometimes our brain does that because it's protecting us from something that's not a real threat, right? So, like, the
Right.
example of not going to the doctor anymore, the doctor is associated with something really bad and scary that happened, but the doctor itself is not dangerous or scary. So
Yeah.
helping, like, figure out those patterns, and then, you know, help them see what is a perceived threat and a real threat, and work on those coping strategies, like, to regulate the nervous system. So it's okay to be scared. How can I, take some deep breaths, or
Mhm.
understand what's going to happen when I'm there, or bring some tools to cope while I'm there? Because we all know avoidance doesn't make it go away. It doesn't make it better.
Sure
Like,
does
every
not.
day that you don't go to the doctor, you're more scared to go to the doctor.
Right.
And one thing I haven't talked about much on this, because it's not so relevant, but is I see a lot of kids who have food allergies, and there's a lot of grief with food allergies because it's
Oh, yeah.
managing a life-threatening chronic illness that makes you feel, different than other kids. It's related to food. Food is part of everything. And,
Yeah.
I've had kids have really bad anaphylactic reactions, and then they're scared to, go
Oh,
back to the doctor, or to have an EpiPen, or those types of things. So that
yeah.
that example comes to mind a lot, in the sense of, helping people understand their nervous system, how to regulate it, why it's happening, and then try to rearrange those patterns a little bit.
Mhm.
So
Awesome.
that's a high level. There's a lot more to
No,
it than
that's
that,
so
but
for sure. I bet we'd be here another couple hours probably, dissecting all of that. But no, that's great. Just initial advice, and I talk about that a lot here on the podcast. Breath work, very, very important. But yeah, just emotional, nervous system regulation, I think, is so important. But I love the little extra that you had in there, is like in terms of going back into those situations, because like, to use my husband and I, for example, like we've had to go back to the doctor many, many times. We've had to go back to the hospital on the same, floor that her NICU was on, to go for her to go to physical therapy. And thankfully everything's fine. It's like those checkups though. But I'm just like, I'm not gonna not take my daughter to get these checkups that they recommend to make sure she's doing well, because I'm too scared to go back and relive some of that. So, but the first time or two we had to do that, we were like, okay, this is the last place we want to be right now, and so we had to figure out ways to navigate that. So, yeah, I think like anything in life, anything when it comes to navigating any aspect of grief, it is that learning to carry it, learning to cope with it, learning what tools, strategies, whatever you want to call them, kind of works for us in those moments. But believing that that's possible too, because I think a lot of people are just, I've met a lot of people that are very stuck in their ways and stuck in that, "Nope, it's not gonna get better." Like, "Nope, this is I'm too traumatized. That's it." And it's like, we just need to open our mind and just try, to,
yeah.
to navigate it. And yeah,
Yeah, that's true
get
for
curious about
kids
it.
too. I mean, kids
I'm sure, yeah.
kids can sometimes be like, you have to use a lot of play to,
Mhm.
like, the best thing we can do is help a kid understand that breathing helps them on their own, because
Yeah,
no kid wants to be told to calm down or to take a deep breath. But once they
yeah,
learn that it actually helps them, then they want to, because they're like, oh, that helps me. Like,
right.
one thing I've been doing as a parent since my kids were little is teaching them how to take deep breaths. And we literally take 3 breaths before bed every single night.
Oh
And
my
my
god.
both of my kids, like, started taking deep breaths at 18 months, one and a half, and they use it regularly, because they're not too old to be like, that doesn't work, or because they
Right.
already know it does
Start
work,
'em
because they
young.
see it work every day, because they need it every day because they're toddlers.
Yeah.
So, like, actually learning to experience that it helps versus just being told that it helps. So a lot of times when I'm meeting a kid, I'm like, you probably heard about deep breaths and you probably think it doesn't work, but did you know that science actually shows that when you take a deep breath, it sends signals to your brain to calm your nervous system? And I just worked with a little girl the other day, and I use, like, pinwheels a lot,
Oh,
or
yeah.
bubbles, and, like, the expandable ball where you open it and close it, like any sort of play or visualization. And the parents are like, she's using that pinwheel like a ton. So I'm like, that's great. So
Aw.
it's just kind of that buy-in is really important for any age.
Yeah, I was gonna say adults too, like, get your pinwheel out. I don't care if you're
Absolutely.
45 or 4, like, you know? Yeah.
Pinwheels for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. You get a pinwheel. You get a pinwheel. That's so true. The last question I have for you. So you came up with something called the dot method, and I would love for you to just like expound on that a little bit and kind of just tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so the DOT method is a teaching tool for kids who are facing cancer. So it could be a kid who has cancer, a kid whose sibling has cancer, whose parent, whose grandparent, whose neighbor, whose teacher. It doesn't matter who, but it's a really simple way to help kids understand what cancer is and how treatment works.
Hmm.
So it's an interactive workbook, a hands-on workbook. So you order it and you have it, and kids are actually writing and drawing in the book. They use different colors to identify cancer cells, treatment,
Wow.
and understand how side effects work. They draw feeling faces in there, how to handle a good day and a difficult day. So it's a comprehensive tool, and I really just developed it working with kids, and then had a doctor that was like, "What is that? You know, that helped our patient so much. I need to know what that is." And I'm like, "Oh, I think I have something really impactful here if I can make it in a comprehensive tool where it can reach more people.
Hmm.
And so I released it at the beginning of 2024, and it's in all the pediatric oncology hospitals here in Chicago,
That's
and it's
amazing.
made its way across the globe. And I'm working on making it available in Spanish this year. I'm also working on another interactive workbook that has a similar approach, but to teach about food allergies. So it's just really simple and hands-on and interactive.
Wow. Kelsey, that's amazing. That's wow. Just like that's got to also just feel so good. Like you're helping so many people, like people you will maybe never meet or even never know, but like just yeah, I mean, I think I've obviously taken so much away from this conversation, but really I think it's just just having a full understanding of like, especially with a disease, and I can relate to this with my own parents. They both had cancer and they were going through those journeys, and I wasn't that young going through it, but my God, I wish I had an interactive workbook of sorts to like fully understand it. And I'll be honest, they were not always, I mean, I was very like involved in those, but like it's interesting. I think other people here can maybe relate. Like if they have a family member or someone who's going through something that is maybe not super forthcoming, or they are not maybe sharing every aspect of the journey and exactly what's going on. Like I feel like especially with my dad, I wasn't totally apprised of everything going on at all times. And even when his cancer spread and then he died 2, 3 months later, like, I didn't know it had spread because he didn't tell me that, and, like, there's just so many things that I think are especially when speaking about just, like, illnesses and things, but even maybe, like, with allergies and things like that, where there's things going on in the body that we are when a lot of us are not medical experts, right? We're trying to understand it and, not that we're not that we're dumb, but we just need it like laid out in a way where we can just start to kind of wrap our head around it and the way that the body works without being super sciency and or if you have doctors talking at you and they're trying to explain things. I remember that many, many times with both of my parents and I'm like, what are you saying? Number 1, because I just didn't totally understand, like, the medical jargon, but number 2, like, I'm worried about my parent here. It's like what we talked about earlier, you're worried about your loved one. Your nervous system is kinda shot. You're, like, half paying attention, you're, like, half out of your body, you're half over here, and it's just, um, it's exhausting, and you just need it kind of broken down a little bit, but I think especially for kids, that's I would imagine even harder to do, but at the same time, I feel like they sometimes take things very literally, which is interesting too.
Hmm.
So just I don't know, the balance of trying to communicate all of that, but that sounds like an amazing tool to kind of help with that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, kids have can have some crazy misconceptions if we don't talk to them about it. Like
Yeah,
I've worked with kids that are carrying around things that are just not true. Like
right.
I got my mom more I had a cold and when I visited in the hospital and that's why she died, or
Oh,
my
God.
uncle hit their head and that's what caused ALS, or like
Wow.
they hold things they just don't understand, and until we have open communication with them they won't know that they can ask those questions, because
Yeah.
if the adults aren't talking about it they think they're not supposed to talk about it, so they don't feel safe asking that question, so they just carry it around with them. And so
Yeah.
like I always say, just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean kids aren't thinking about it or worried
Yeah.
about it. And that's the best thing we can do is just open the lines of communication, figure out what they understand, what they don't, and help them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and I appreciate you sharing about your parents, I know that's a big reason why you started all of this. And
Mhm.
my dad has kidney cancer,
Oh,
and my I recently used the dot method with my 4-year-old to teach him about
oh,
grandpa, and it was really amazing and hard. But to
yeah.
see like my own child using my resource cover to cover for
Oh
my
my
dad and
God.
his grandfather, so but it's hard being the adult child. And
Yeah.
um, I want to give one more plug if I
Of
can.
course,
That
please.
also
Yes.
I also work for Pickles Group, which is a nonprofit organization that provides support to kids who have a parent with cancer. Everything is
So
completely
great.
free, and there's a basically a resource that hospitals can give out, families can request on like how to talk to kids about cancer that I've helped design and create. And then we have a youth programming for kids across the country and world, really, where they can get on virtually with other kids, and they work through a 5-week psychosocial curriculum that I designed. And the
Oh my
volunteers
gosh.
are trained, mostly graduate students, and they help deliver the group work. So that's a resource that's available to anyone who's listening who has kids who are navigating a parent's cancer. So the youth programming is for first through 12th grade,
Okay, I was
but a
gonna
lot of
ask
the
about that
content is for
age range. Okay.
all ages. I mean, if there's a parent parenting a 3 and 5-year-old, the content would help them, but the
Yeah.
youth programming is for first through 12th graders.
Okay. That's so amazing. That's so valuable. I was like, first of all, where was this when my parents had cancer? Number one. Even though I wasn't
I know.
on a
So many
major
people say that.
Oh my God. I don't I mean, listen, nothing will humble you faster having not even just having cancer, right? Like just losing a parent in general, like it just makes you feel like you are 12 years old again. And revert back to you're just like, wait, I need my mom and dad, but like my mom and dad are the one that died. Like, it's very difficult
Yeah,
to wrap your
yeah,
head around. But yeah, and then just, making sense of the diagnosis and what that means and how long they have it, just all of these things like at once. So that is an incredible I would love to link all of this in the show notes as well. And I'm gonna ask you in a second, like where everyone can find you and all of that. But that is just such a powerful resource. And that's thank you for plugging that truly because if anyone listening here doesn't need that now or know someone who needs it now, we might in the future. Unfortunately, I wish those things weren't needed, but here we are.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, it's
yeah,
growing. I mean, it's
that's
growing
so
rapidly.
great.
We're just it's just a 3-year-old organization, and we've got kids from every state except for Wyoming. So if there's a Wyoming listener and you
Please.
and you need Pickles Group, like we want to make sure we're
Oh,
reaching every corner
oh,
of our map
that's
for sure.
awesome. Thank you, Kelsey. Well, amazing. Well, if anybody wants to work with you or just reach out to you, connect with you on social media and all the things, where can they find you?
So my Instagram account is Child Life Therapist, and that's also my website. So it's childlifetherapist.com. Um, I have another website and account for my book, but it's the Dot Method. It's available on Amazon or themethodworkbooks.com or the Method Workbooks. Since I'm releasing more of them, there will be more Method Workbooks.
So
In terms of the nonprofit, it's picklesgroup.org. So it's
perfect.
was like pickles like the food. It was named after the original kids who helped found the organization.
Oh,
They named the organization.
that's amazing. Well, listen, it's a name you're not going to forget anytime soon, so I'm here for
That's true.
it. I
Yeah.
love it. Kelsey, thank you so much for joining us today. And this is like such a jam-packed episode, but you've just provided so many great, resources and things to keep in mind, and navigating grief, truly for any age. So I'm so grateful for you for coming on today. Thank you. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you're taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, more coping tools, ways to work with me, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Losses Become Gains, and on Instagram and TikTok at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. And remember to always keep asking yourself, how will I turn my losses into gains today? I'll catch you in the next episode.